Well, Shabbat Shalom. I'm saying Shabbat Shalom. It's Shalom, Shalom. Welcome, welcome, world changers. Good to see y'all. Today we got several more comments that I want to be responding to, as well as a critical thinking tip, and also getting into the book of Philo as well. Philo, actually, book 22, that book about the person of Abraham. So we have a lot to talk about tonight. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or prayer requests, feel free to drop them in the live chat. And so, welcome everyone. Welcome. Just get this going here on the other thing over here. So Calamentos says shalom, everyone. Shalom, Calamentos. Billy says shalom. Shalom, Billy. Welcome. Shayla says, shalom, I probably won't be online much because I'm traveling, but I do listen before bed. Love y'all. Shalom, Shayla. Well, good to see you anyway. And yes, blessings and love multiplied back to you as well, Shayla. Psalm 94 says, shalom. Psalm 94, seek the Lord says, shalom. Welcome, as always. So, I have a whole lot of... well, not a whole lot, but I have several different comments that I'd like to respond to. And these are comments that I've received just recently. And let me see if I can pull it up here. It's been a really, really busy day around here, and I've been just trying to catch up on things. So a little bit not so much as... in order as usual here, so please bear with me. Okay. Okay, so the first comment I would like to address is a comment from Tibetan Christian. And Tibetan Christian left this comment on one of the shorts entitled The 12 Disciples Preached Without Paul. And he says, however, it's said Paul is sent specifically to the Gentiles. That's the argument. 12 apostles were preaching to Jews primarily. Okay, thank you for your comment, Tibetan Christian. So just to respond to the first thing that you said there, you said that Paul is sent specifically to the Gentiles. Now, I'm not sure why you said that, because that's really not my argument at all. So I'm not sure if that's I'm not sure if you're trying to, if this is just a straw man, or if you just didn't understand the video. So in the video, I was just saying basically that the 12 disciples preached the gospel for a considerable amount of time, depending on who you talk to. I mean, I've never heard anything less than 1 year, but I mean, some scholars, I understand, they believe that it was like 15 years later, from the time of, let's say, the crucifixion, resurrection, to the time of Paul's conversion, okay? So some say 15, some say 10, some say a couple years. I spoke to one person that said 1 year, although this person wasn't a scholar, but they said 1 year. The point is this, that the 12 disciples preached the gospel And things were happening in the New Testament church without Paul. A lot of, it says a lot of people, thousands in fact, were added to the church. We have like 3,000 at a time were baptized. Okay, and a lot of this stuff was going on, in the first few chapters, especially Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 3, 4, 5, 6. It isn't until Acts chapter 7 we even see Paul at all, let alone Paul being, saved at that point in time. So the idea is, and church history tells us that the 12 disciples fulfilled the Great Commission before Paul. They didn't sit around twiddling their thumbs, for anywhere from a year to 15 years until Paul actually came on board. And by the way, it just wouldn't be it would have to be at least how many years? 3-4 years at least. No, actually more than that, 5 years, because there's the time between, let's say, Acts chapter 2 and the conversion of Paul, and then even Paul himself would say that he spent like 3 years without doing anything, just going into the going up to Damascus and into the wilderness and such. He spent a long time not really doing anything, and then come back. So you have to add at least 1 year, if not 15 years, to 3 years, in order for even to see Paul on the scene and actually being active in the community. So, no, the 12 disciples did not sit around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for Paul to come around. No, they went out into all the world as instructed by Yeshua and preached the gospel. So, my challenge to a lot of Christians was, can you preach the gospel without quoting Paul? Can you preach the gospel without the epistles of Paul? Because the 12 disciples did. Yeshua did himself. And so Tibetan Christian says the 12 disciples were preaching to Jews primarily. I would like to know what your source is on that, Tibetan Christian, or at least your ways of thinking, your way of thought on that, because they went out into all the world, which is not Jews, at least not limited to Jews, but to Gentiles, of course. So they went out in just some went north, some went south, some went east. So they went out everywhere, and I don't know how anyone could say that they preached to Jews primarily. And so I just wanted to know what your source is on that. They're a Tibetan Christian. And so we have Alan here, says, Shalom, everyone. Shalom, Alan. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. So, and once again, Tibetan Christian, thank you for the comment. And yeah, I have another comment here from Bob Gaming. You guys might remember Bob he was in the live chat with us, I think, several days ago. Bob Gaming says, it's posting on the video called What Does It Mean to Believe? And I know that some of you know exactly what I'm going to say, or what I say about that is to believe. If you believe in Jesus, you believe in a Jewish rabbi, and to believe in a Jewish rabbi means to go by his teachings and to follow his example. So it's very simple. And so what are the teachings of Yeshua? It's Torah, right? What is the example? I'm sure most Christians would agree that he did not sin. Most Christians would say that he did not sin. And if he did not sin, that means that he walked in the Torah, right? Because sin is transgression of the law. So if you don't sin, then you don't transgress the law. So WWJD, what would Jesus do? Obey the Torah. That's what he did. So Bob Gaming says, man, it's hard to let go of the way we were, he says we were taught. I think you probably mean we were taught. Yeah, and that's true. That's true, Bob. It's true for all of us to one degree or another. For some of us, it's harder to let go than others. Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard to let go of the way we were taught. A lot of people settle into it. Sometimes it's just a thing where they don't think anything the way they think. They don't think outside of that box. And some people are limited to they're limited to that box because of their ego as well. They don't want to think outside of the box. So Bob says, my grandmother was Baptist, my mother was Jehovah's Witness, my stepdad was Muslim, my aunt was Seventh-day Adventist. Now that's quite a mix there. That's quite a mix, Bob. Wow. Yeah. I wonder what, like, if they all got together, like in some kind of a family reunion or something. I wonder how that would look. But that's quite the family background there. So as Bob says, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus made it clear who was in charge. His Father knows all and doesn't tell him everything. He may know now, but Yahweh is still over Yeshua. Matthew 24:36, quote, but about the day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Yeah, very interesting observation there, Bob. Thank you for sharing that. And, okay, so here's, of course, we always get this. And you can expect it because this is on a video called Why Atheism Has Pervaded in the West. Basically, I said there that atheism has pervaded in the West a lot because at least one of the reasons, I'm not saying it's the only reason, but one of the reasons is because of the failure of the church. The church should be a real powerhouse of the demonstration of the power of the Spirit and of God, but they're not, unfortunately. Now, there are some a little bit here and there. There are the odd exceptions, very rare though. But because, see, if the church today, what I mean by the church is everyone who or every community or every church in an organizational sense, if they were all operating like they did in the book of Acts, then I can't see there being any, atheism would be very rare. I mean, you'd have a lot of, talk about evidence. You have a lot of evidence there in the book of Acts, especially, stuff that was going on. So this particular individual says, unfortunately for you, all forms of Christianity can be debunked with Western atheism. I think that's a little bit of an overstatement there because I don't even think that you know what all forms of Christianity is. Okay, because Christianity comes in so many different shapes and sizes and flavors and styles. And I mean, like I always say, like 45,000 denominations. Like, yeah, that's a lot. So, I mean, even just earlier, I said that when I say church, I'm not talking about, absolutely 100% of everybody who goes to church or something like that. But, there is the rare exception. So, yeah, you got to always leave room for the exceptions because there are exceptions for the most part. So you said, unfortunately for me, all forms of Christianity can be debunked with Western atheism. Now, a lot of people would say that I'm not even a Christian. Okay, so I'm not sure. I think that you have like layer upon layer upon layer of fallacy going on here. You got a straw man. I don't even think you know what a Christian is, really. Okay, other than just someone who calls themselves a Christian. That doesn't necessarily mean they are. And to say that all forms of Christianity have been debunked, no. I don't think that you would. I don't think that you should say that because I don't think you know what all forms of Christianity is. Okay. And then he says, because Christianity is tautological fairy tale. God bless. Well, again, depends on how you define Christianity. Okay, so what we do here a lot is we speak against the mainstream, what we always call the modern corrupt Christian narrative. We speak a lot against that Christianity. So, it's interesting that you pin Christianity as opposed to belief in God in general, as opposed, like, for example, Jews and Muslims, and others as well that are not Christians that believe in God. So I'm not sure exactly where you stand there. However, see, Kenneth, I would say that your comment actually proves my point. Because my point is that the problem in the West is that a lot of Christianity, people who call themselves Christians and go to church, and church pastors and churches are nothing but social clubs, and they really don't have a connection with the real deal. They have a form of godliness, as it says, but they deny the power thereof. There's no power there. They got faith in a sense, in a way, even though I hesitate to even call it faith. Just because they have a belief, I don't think that that's necessarily faith. However, I would say, a lot of Christianity, fairy tale Christianity, is the reason why atheism exists. However, there is the real deal out there. The Book of Acts kind of practice and doctrine and power, which I can witness that I've experienced, at least to some degree, and I know a lot of people have as well. So yes, that's the problem. A lot of churches do not have the power, and therefore they cannot produce the evidence. However, you can, on rare occasion, find some that can. Thank you, C. Kennett, for your comment. Now, here's an interesting comment. I like this one. Again, this is an older video. I don't know how many years old this is. I forget exactly even what year I made it in. I think it might have been 3 years ago or so. I forget. Fact-checking Ron Wyatt. There's an old video, fact-checking Ron Wyatt. And so David Thomas says this. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. David Thomas says, I don't know how you made such a ridiculously engaging video such that I could watch the whole thing, but well done, great info, and super interesting. Well, thank you very much, David. I'm glad that you found it interesting and informative and engaging. Thank you very much, David. And also, we got another, I think it's good to have both sides of the story here, the negative and the positive. So I have another short video that was posted not too long ago called Jesus Said Obey for Everlasting Life. Just simply pointing out the observation that whenever someone came to Jesus in the Gospels and asked Jesus, how do I obtain eternal life? He always pointed to the commandments. He always pointed to the commandments. That would have been the perfect time to preach the modern day corrupt Christian narrative, but he didn't do that. He pointed to the commandments. He said that, but that's the way it should be. I mean, that's the way it says. If he's true to the Torah, if he's true to the scriptures, then he should point to the commandments for everlasting life. Yeah, do this and you will live, as it says in the Torah. So denominations don't save, only Jesus saves. Says, nice work with a thumbs up. Thank you very much. And DG has a very interesting thing here that DG posts here. Hail Stan. Hail Stan. Maybe you can give me a little bit more information. Yeah, I'd like to know who this Stan is. I'd like to know who this Stan is that you are hailing. All right. And another comment here. From Ellie Silva. I remember we see this name every once in a while in the comment section. It is a comment that is posted on a video called Torah in Effect in Acts chapter 10. We talk about this actually on a semi-regular basis. Actually, just the other day we talked about this. Acts chapter 10, you got Cornelius, a Gentile, and he's giving alms, he's praying, and he's a devout man. He's righteous, if you will. And an angel comes to him and says, you know, your prayers and your alms have come up as a memorial before the Lord. You know, and if you know the Torah, you know that is a direct reference to the teaching that we read in Exodus chapter 30, the atonement money that will come up as a memorial before the Lord. You don't see that that's not something you see in many places. So there's a direct connection there, a link, if you will, between Acts chapter 10 and Exodus chapter 30. So Ellie says, yes, give to charity, be generous, just as God is generous, but with us, but never forget that what Jesus has done for you, broken for you. Excellent. I appreciate, this reminds me of my olden days when I was spent a lot of time out on the streets and preaching this whole thing about the crucifixion and resurrection and such. And, it's an awesome story. I do want to give a little bit of food for thought on that line. And that is, what did Jesus actually do? I mean, what work did he actually do? If you really want to think about it, get the gears turning a little bit. What did he do other than just surrender? But is that really a work? Is that something that you actually actively do? Or is that just a passive thing that you actually don't? Surrendering is just basically surrendering. So is that really doing something? So what did he actually do? I don't want to sound overly critical, because it's an awesome thing, and everybody should have. I do believe everybody should have a personal revelation of what happened, because I think that's a very important time in history. So he surrendered. He allowed himself to get arrested. He allowed himself to get. Now, it depends on what gospel you read, because in one gospel you got him quite verbal, and the other gospel, like for example, like Mark, he's very silent. He doesn't say a thing at all. In the Gospel of John, being almost the opposite of the Gospel of Mark, he's quite verbose. But what did Jesus actually do? And I know. Everybody's like, well, yeah, he died for you, this kind of thing. But I mean, what kind of work? Because what he actually did was he just surrendered to the Romans, right? He just surrendered to the authorities. So it was the Roman soldiers who actually nailed him to the cross, right? But nobody ever talks about their work. Nobody ever talks about what they did. You know what I mean? And I know this seems weird to think like this, but hey, we got to put some thought to this. Jesus just surrendered. Everybody else did the work, it seems like. You know what I'm saying? And I'm saying this, when I mean everybody else, I mean the Roman soldiers, I mean the authorities, Pilate and Herod, the chief priests, and all that kind of thing. They actually did things, whereas Jesus just surrendered to them in that sense. So just an interesting thought. You never hear of anybody talking about, thank God for the Romans who nailed Jesus to the cross. Thank God for what they did. You never hear that. Just an interesting thought. All right, and then we also have, thank you again, Ellie. We also have our good old John coming back. John's always coming back all the time to put in some interesting comments in the comment section of the videos. The gospel according to Jesus, simple as what it's kind of like exactly what I said before. Jesus said that you must obey in order to have eternal life. And so John leaves a comment here. The Ten Commandments. Where in Scripture does it say that Elohim destroyed a whole city like Sodom for eating pork? John, nobody said that. Nobody said that. And why would you, again, this is a straw man fallacy because nobody ever made that claim. Nobody ever made the claim that it was the sin of Sodom was eating pork. I didn't make that claim. I'm not sure why John would put this kind of thing on this video. Did King Salmon not bring idols, right? IDLES, into Israel for his many wives? Okay. Again, John, I'm not 100% sure why you would bring that up either, because that's not really part of the message. The gospel according to Jesus was just obey. Okay. I'm not sure what you're thinking if you're thinking that King Salmon was actually saved or not. I don't know if he was or not. I mean, I don't know what you're trying to say there, John. Another thing is, why are there still Israelites in Israel? Not sure what you're getting at there, John. Only one sin not mentioned in the 10 is above all sexual immorality. Actually, this is really the main point of the reason why I want to read this comment, because actually I just noticed a couple things in the live chat there. So actually, there is at least 2, probably more, of the commandments that do deal with sexual immorality, but not explicitly, not like naming it like that. Like, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Some people, their gods are pleasures, and of various sorts and various kinds, and that kind of thing. That can become a god, and actually, that is one of the primary gods in the world today, to be honest with you. Then there's the whole thing about committing adultery, and of course, I do believe that commandment actually goes beyond what is traditionally believed to be interpreted. Okay, I believe that there is a huge. I believe you can really unpack that way more than anybody you could ever imagine. So that would really include almost all sexual immorality just in that one commandment, if you really unpack it the way it should be unpacked. Not to mention stuff like thou shalt not covet, which can also be inclusive of part and parcel of the whole thing about sexual immorality. Psalm 94 says King Salmon. Yeah. Actually, it's King Salmon. That's what I got here. King Salmon, yeah. Yeah, and Psalm 94, I do realize that DG, I would assume that's what DG was actually referring to, but I'm just, hey, you never know. Never know anymore these days, right? I mean, someone talks about Hail Stan, I think, well, you never know. There could be a Stan out there. So, anyways, critical thinking session just before Hannah comes on. We'll have Hannah come on in just a few minutes. We did talk about this before. We mentioned a whole lot of fallacies, in the past several weeks, and some other critical thinking tips. So I just want to kind of review a few of them. There actually are a whole lot more, lots more. But just to review a few of them, I think it's super, super important that we all polish up on our critical thinking skills. in so doing, I think that God is giving us all critical thinking skills, and we need to polish up on it so that we can read and understand more, interpret things better, look at things in a better light, know what to believe and why we believe it and such. So I think that's important. So, in order to be able to think critically, some people think when they hear the word critically, they have like a negative. They think it's like negative, but it's not actually. It's actually very positive. Thinking critically is just simply meaning that you are putting into practice good skills of judgment and thoughts, and know how to assess the evidence that you have. So so critical thinking, I think one of the most important points of critical thinking is to come to the table, as I always say, with an open mind. Not an empty mind, but an open mind. In other words, be humble enough to say, you know what, maybe I don't know it all. Maybe I missed something very important that could completely change the game. And that's fine, and that's great. I mean, we're all learning. I mean, I'm learning all the time. So we're all learning. We're all progressing in our knowledge and hopefully progressing in wisdom as well. So we have to come with an open mind and a curious mind too. An open mind, a curious mind, to say, you know what, let's see if we can find something else out there, if there's other evidence or something else that I've never heard before. So when we do come to the table of discussion, then we need to come putting aside all of our preconceived ideas to the best of our ability. We need to be able to question our own assumptions. We all have assumptions, but we need to be able to question our own assumptions. And I got to tell you this. The reason why I am where I am today is because I did that. Way back in the early 90s when I first got involved with, the community, the church, and I was taught all these things. I'm sure you guys, most of you were taught the same things I was taught. And so I just had to, I like to reassess all the time. I like to step back and think, okay, let me see, how am I doing here? What's going on? Let me just rehash everything, go through everything, question things, and not in a bad way, not in a, with an attitude, but just being honest and wanting to learn more and wanting the truth. And so, doing that is what got me where I am today. Otherwise, I'd be with the rest of the corrupt Christian narrative propagators. So we need to be able to identify. We need to be able to identify and question our own assumptions. Now, that doesn't mean that our assumptions are wrong. I mean, we can assume things that are actually correct, but sometimes they are wrong. So that's why we have to question them and be willing to consider alternative perspectives too. Okay, that's another thing. Because a lot of people are not. They're just locked out. They're locked out. They lock their mind. They lock, it's like they don't want to learn anything. And another great point when it comes to critical thinking skills is to actively seek out evidence to either support or refute any given claim. Now, I'm talking about not just claims of other people, but your own claims. Like, okay, let me just play the devil's advocate, so to speak, on myself. Let's just pull out the evidence. What evidence would I have to refute what I believe? What evidence would there be that would support what I believe? And to be able to step back from yourself and to assess it from a third party point of view, if it's even possible to do that, I mean, I think that is like the epitome of critical thinking skills. And so we have to also be deliberate and systematic in a way in our thinking. So we have to have like a method of our thinking, or a method of testing. And we talk a lot about that when it comes to the scriptures, especially when it comes to Paul. So we take a big topic, and we break it down into smaller parts. We identify what information is relevant and what information is not relevant. And we identify the arguments. And also we need to identify the evidence that would either support or not support, refute any given argument. Now, here's a biggie. I talk about this a lot, but here's a biggie. It's probably one of the toughest, the hardest things that anybody could do when you are practicing critical thinking. And that is to identify your own biases and your own assumptions. And to acknowledge that, to acknowledge your own biases and assumptions. And a lot of people can't do that, I think. In my experience, a lot of people can't do that. And looking back in the past, I mean, I think it's difficult for every one of us. I mean, even myself, I can't think of anything right now, but probably there was many times probably in the past where it was difficult for me to identify my own biases or assumptions. But you know what? It does. We have to be strong. We have to be courageous. We cannot be afraid of saying, you know what? I was wrong. We can't be afraid of getting to that point. We got to swallow our pride, right? So that's a huge one. To be able to identify, to be aware of our own biases and assumptions. And then once we identify it, once we know they're there, not to ignore it, but rather to work actively to overcome those biases and assumptions. And that's a lot of work too, a lot of work. So that means that we have to be willing to challenge our own beliefs, challenge our own preconceptions. We have to be willing to seek out information that contradicts our beliefs. Yeah, and it can hurt for a lot of people, especially people who are not so rooted and grounded. It can be something that a lot of people, they can't handle. But that's part of good critical thinking skills. So, yeah, and I mean, we all need good critical thinking skills for, to help us to know not just what to believe, but why we believe it. And even in our everyday life, life on earth, so to speak, and, learning how to make good decisions, decision making and problem solving skills. One of the biggest parts of critical thinking is asking the question, what does that mean? Does it mean fill in the blank? Or maybe you could say, it doesn't mean fill in the blank. So it's really, really important, I believe, and this is the reason why we're talking about it at least a little bit, almost every live stream, talking about the different critical thinking skills. Yeah, a lot of people don't want to think. I've heard it so many times. People say, well, they don't pay me enough to think. I'm not paid enough to think. They basically just join in with the crowd. They go with the flow. They don't think. They let everybody else do the thinking for them. But that's not a good thing, you know? It's not a good thing. You gotta do your own thinking. All right, so Hannah is going to play for us for a few minutes, and we'll come back and we will pick up where we left off on Friday evening, reading from the book 22 of Philo of Alexandria, moving on with the subject of Abraham. Okay, so here's Hannah. Thank you, Hannah. Beautiful, beautiful as always. Thank you for blessing us with your talent once again. Blessings multiplied to you. Alan says, also evil in Jasher about Sodom and Gomorrah injustice. Yes, it's an interesting thing. You know, you read the book of Jasher, it does speak a lot about that topic, the injustice, the judicial system, if you will, of Sodom and Gomorrah, the whole structure of that civilization. Yes. Tower Time says, Shalom and howdy. Bless y'all, brothers and sisters. Shalom and howdy, Tower Time. Blessings multiplied back to you. Tammy says, Shalom all. Shalom, Tammy. Welcome. Blessings to you and yours. Ellen says, nice. Thank you, Hannah. There you go, Hannah. Thank you, Alan. All right. So, and on TikTok as well, we have Bushman asked a question. I'm not going to get into this. Well, you know, maybe I'll touch on it. You know, Bushman 420 says, who was Melchizedek? Very good question. Most Christians are taught that Melchizedek is like the pre-incarnate Christ, you know, like a spiritual being. But if you do some study on the whole topic of Melchizedek, especially from the point of view of in the Jewish world, they would tell you that Melchizedek was actually a human king of Jerusalem. We got Adonai-Sedek, spoken of later, which means Lord of righteousness, whereas Melchizedek means king of righteousness. And both of them were the king of Jerusalem. And so there are different theories on exactly who it was. The typical Jewish belief of it is that it was actually Shem himself, as in the son of Noah. So, it's... And by the way, Bushman 420, we have at least, how many? At least one. We do so many videos around here, I can't remember exactly how many, but I know at least one whole video we dedicated to speaking about Melchizedek. So that's available for you to watch as well. Justin, thank you for the follow, Justin. I appreciate that. Driver says, read and discern. Yes, part of critical thinking skills, read and discern. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Translates justice, 911 everlasting gospel. Alan says Shem. Yes, Shem. Yes. You know, I used to believe, like how a lot of Christians believe, you know, that it was basically Jesus, you know, in spiritual form. But the more you read it and the more you actually study it, the more you see that it does appear to be human, not just some angel or some pre-incarnate Christ, but rather human. Although some people might say, well, pre-incarnate Christ, you can take that into, you can... It depends on how you want to look at it, right? Talk about critical thinking skills. I mean, you can boil it down to saying, well, any progenitor of Yeshua could be called a pre-incarnate Christ, like David, or Jacob, or Abraham, or whatever. Keep in mind the word Christ is translated from the Hebrew word Mashiach, which simply means anointed one, and in the Tanakh, we have the concept that there are actually many anointed ones. Anybody who is anointed is actually, by definition, a Mashiach. Interesting. Okay, Justin, over there, again, thank you for the follow. And Justin asked this question. Can you explain the faith alone thing I just saw? Okay. I'm trying to, there's a lot to say about that, so I'm trying to be as specific as possible, trying to think of exactly what you want to hear. So the word faith in the Greek literally means fidelity, loyalty. So it's talking about consistency, So, Yeshua taught that you have a little bit of faith and you get great results. Well, even secular people know that, in the sense of, if you're consistent on one little thing all the time, it will produce great results. It can produce great results. Let me just put it that way. I always like to compare it to prevailing winds. I'm not sure where you guys are. If you live, in the heart of a city or something, you might not be this familiar with this kind of thing. But where I live, you have the prevailing winds where, a lot of the trees, not just trees, but sometimes even structures and all kinds of things, are all leaning a little bit in one way, because there's prevailing winds. Now, does it get like that? Like some of the, like even fences, or towers, in a sense too. Like if it's not secured really, really good, but I mean, lots of different things. Trees would lean, one way. And it's not necessarily one windstorm that does that, but it's a consistent blowing of the wind in that same direction. The wind is just beating on that object, whatever it is, a tree or a fence or whatever it may be. It's beating on that object like constantly, like almost daily. It's pushing it a little bit, pushing it a little bit, pushing it a little bit. And you'd be amazed at how strong, or what prevailing winds will do to things. It can bend metal. I mean, it's amazing. All you need is just, you think about this yourself too. If you do something over and over and over again, even if it's just a little bit, like if you take anything, you score it a little bit every day. You score it a little bit every day. Pretty soon you'll go right through it. So it's the prevailing winds. It's the wind. It's the faith of the wind that produces that effect. It's the fidelity, the consistency of that wind that keeps on blowing. So that's the way it is with faith. So I don't believe that faith is some kind of a mental belief. I think that faith is actual, like, action. It's faithfulness. If you are faithful to somebody, then you have to have action, or else you're not faithful. And faith without works is dead. Faithfulness without works is dead, right? So you have to have action. How can you be faithful to your boss if you never do what the boss wants you to do? How can you be faithful to your company or faithful to your employer if you never do what you're supposed to do? So faith is action, works, or if you want to put it this way, doing what you're supposed to do. And sometimes doing can mean, not doing too. Like, for example, most of the 10 commandments are negative commandments. Thou shalt not. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do that. Thou shalt not do the other thing. Well, that's not really works per se, but that is, if you're abiding by those, you are actually doing them by not doing them, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, faith is an action. It's not just something that you just kind of, it's like talk about fairy tale, like a fairy tale, like some kind of a fantasy, some kind of an imagination. I don't believe faith. A lot of people think that faith is like an imagination. I say, just like it's a hope. They confuse faith with hope. So it's faith, hope, and love, right? Everybody has their idea of what love is. I think we all can pretty much agree on what hope is, but faith is faithfulness, consistency, being steady. Those who endure to the end will be saved, Jesus said. not just anybody who has, some kind of belief. All you got to do is just believe and you'll be saved. That's not what he said. You have to endure to the end. That's being faithful. That is faith. So, unfortunately, I think a lot of Christians cheapen the gospel. They make God so cheap. They make the word of God so cheap. They make their walk with God so cheap. It's like, well, all you gotta do is just receive. You don't have to do anything. All you gotta do is just believe, whatever that means. You don't have to do anything. Justin says, I think I get what you were saying. We will be judged by our works, right? Yes, that is what Jesus taught. A very good example of that is in Matthew chapter 25. Matthew chapter 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats. It's very clear. This is what's going to happen on that great day, the day of judgment. All nations will come before him, he says. All nations will come to him, and he will divide. You're in, you're out. You're in, you're out. He'll divide the sheep from the goats. And it doesn't say that he divides based upon their belief, just simply, what people call faith today. It says that he divides, he identifies the sheep from the goats based upon what they do. When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me water. You know what? When I was poor, you helped me out. Therefore, enter into the joy of the Lord. Here, heaven is yours. Enjoy. But you guys, you goats, when I needed you, you were not there. You didn't do anything. Well, you just thought it's almost like they thought that they could just believe. It's almost like they just thought it was just like faith alone. Yeah, well, where were you when I needed you? Yeah, well, why didn't you do these things when I needed it to be done? Oh, okay, so sorry about your luck, into everlasting fire. Matthew 7, verses 21 to 23 said, many people will come to me. Many will come to me. Lots of people will come to me saying, Lord, Lord. So they will come to him. They will profess him as Lord. So a lot of people would say, well, right there, that guarantees your salvation. All you got to do is just come to the Lord, come to Jesus, and profess him as your Lord, your personal Lord and Savior. That's all. He said, many will come and profess him as Lord, saying, Lord, Lord. And he's going to reject them. He's going to reject them. And they're like, well, how can you reject us? Like, Jesus, like, we cast out evil spirits in your name. Your power was working through us. You were speaking through us. We prophesied in your name, not in our name, not by our works. We're not trusting in we're trusting in the power of your name. We did many mighty works in your name. In other words, by your power. You're working through us. So how could you reject us? Matthew 7, 23, Jesus said, I will turn to them and I will say to them, depart from me, you anomians. Anomian means you live like there is no Torah. You live like there's no law to live by. You live without the law. Anamos. Meaning negative. You're basically saying no, or there's nothing. There's no nomos, no Torah, no law, rules to go by. Anomian. People who live like there's no law. The Anomians. Jesus made it very clear. He will cast them out. Yeah, Justin said the Greek word is pistis and means faith, faithfulness. Yes. And if you look at how, that's what I was saying. Faith, it's better understood to mean faithfulness, fidelity, and consistency. That's what it's better understood. If you were every time you see that word faith, especially in the Gospels. No, the letters of Paul are different. Paul is a completely he's in a category all by himself. Okay, but you look at the Gospels and Peter, James, John. The book of Revelation is a really good one too. You look at the book of Revelation, Jesus very clearly, he was speaking to his church, not to the world, not to those who were unsaved, but he spoke to his church. And almost every church, he says, if you don't repent, judgment's going to fall on you. Serious judgment. Some of these judgments, I don't even want to talk about them because they're so serious. Certainly doesn't sound like salvation to me, because how can you be judged so severely for your sin if your sin is forgiven? And what did Jesus say to pretty much every one of those churches? I know your works. I know your works. I know your works. I know your works. It's always works. John is a whole lot different than Paul. But whenever you see the word faith, okay, especially outside of Paul, whenever you see the word faith, it's better to understand it as faithfulness, fidelity, consistency. In other words, you see the word faith, think faithfulness, think loyalty, consistency, fidelity. Thank you, Justin. This is really good. Alan puts it really good here. Alan says, they say faith is just believing. Yeah. Well, if you believe it's going to rain, get an umbrella. Faith equals actions. That's true. Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah. And Billy says, just believing sounds like a very wide gate and broad road. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And like I said, I always say we need to know what we believe, and we need to put our belief on some really good evidence. Really good evidence. That just solidifies our beliefs. And if we're faithful, then there you go. Someone asked, is Paul's writings the Pope's doing? I would not say it's the Pope's doing. I would not say that. It's a lot of people have a lot of different views on Paul's writings, but Justin said, forgive me because this is the first time I've seen your channel, but it sounded like you don't like Paul. It's not that I don't like Paul. I just don't like putting Paul where he's not supposed to be. Let me just put it this way, Justin. My focus is to be as unbiased and as historical and as factual as possible when it comes to Paul. A lot of people more or less worship Paul. It's like if Paul says it, it's got to be 100% truth, word of God. But that's not even what he said himself. Paul didn't say that. Paul's writings, he didn't say that. So I want to be as factual as possible. If I say anything about Paul that anybody doesn't like, the first question I would have for them is, so what did I say that's not true? Because a lot of times I say something that's true and they don't like it. And so they call me names, right? They call me all kinds of things. Well, okay, you want to call me names for telling the truth, so I just believe that I think that a lot of people put Paul on the same level as Jesus or even higher sometimes. And they wouldn't tell you that, but they do it by their action. Their actions will tells you that they make Paul like their God. Like they put Paul above Jesus, they put Paul above Peter, James, and John, above Moses, above everybody. Yeah, it's true. It says most of Christianity quotes Paul more than Messiah. It's true. Justin says, well, it's like Peter said, Paul's writings were hard to understand. Yeah, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 15 to 16. That's what it says. I think it's important to understand that most, if not all, let me say it again, most, if not all, Christian scholars would tell you that 2 Peter was not written by Peter. It was a forgery. They have many reasons to believe that. So a lot of people believe that 2 Peter is like just, it says it's by Peter, therefore it's got to be by Peter. Well, we do have evidence that 2 Peter was not written by Peter. Yeah. You look at how Peter and Paul got along look how Paul spoke of Peter in Galatians. Didn't really speak of Peter very highly at all. Seems like they were actually like almost enemies. I can't say enemies, but they certainly didn't good. It got along like, oil and water. Like it didn't seem like they were not. Peter and Paul didn't travel together. Acts chapter 15, Acts chapter 21, we see the same kind of thing. And Peter and Paul doesn't seem to be really close, to say the least. And you got to keep in mind, too, as well, that it's traditionally believed that the book of Acts was written by Luke, which would have been a good friend of Paul. And so it would have been written biased towards Paul. Alan says, your word, Torah, is a lamp unto my feet, showing me the way I should walk. Yes. The wise virgins had oil for their lamps. Works, in my opinion. Well, yeah. Yeah, they prepared. They were prepared, that's for sure. Okay, so we got on the schedule for tonight, Philo. We're going to read Philo, book 22, and I'm on chapter 8. For those of you who are new here, Philo is a very interesting fella. He's from the 1st century, right? He would have been a contemporary of Jesus, actually. He lived pretty much right around the same time as Jesus, and in the same part of the world, and in the same culture. And he was a Jew as well, so very interesting, Philo's take on a lot of this stuff. So Philo has a huge volume of works, books that he wrote, lots of stuff, and a lot of it has to do with the scriptures. So it's just interesting to read this stuff. Okay, so just Philo of Alexandria, book 22, chapter 8. At whom God, being naturally indignant and being angry that which appeared to be the most excellent of animals, and which had been thought worthy of being reckoned akin to himself by reason of his participation in reason, when he ought to have practiced virtue, devoted himself rather to wickedness, and to every species of vice, appointing a fitting punishment for them, and determined to destroy the whole race at the time existing by a deluge, and not only those who dwelt in the Champagne country, and in excuse me here, thing is messing up, and in the lower districts. But those also who lived in the most lofty mountains for the great deep, this is Genesis 7:11, being raised to a height which it had never reached before, burst through its mouths with its whole collective impetuosity into the seas existing among us, and they overflowed and inundated all the islands and continents, and incessant floods of everlasting fountains and of native rivers and torrents combined together, mingled with one another, and rising to a vast height, so as to surmount everything. Nor indeed was the air tranquil, for a deep and unbroken cloud overspread the whole heaven, and there were fearful storms of wind, and roarings of thunder, and flashings of lightning, and rapid hurlings of thunderbolts, ceaseless storms of rain being poured forth, so that one might have thought that all the parts of the universe were hastening to dissolve themselves into one element of the nature of water, until, while the water from above kept pouring down, and that below kept bursting up, the streams were raised to a height above everything, so that they not only overwhelmed and hid from sight all the plains and all the level ground, but even the tops of the highest mountains. For every part of the earth was under water, so that it was wholly buried and carried away, and the world was mutilated of huge proportions, and appeared in all its wholeness and integrity, fearful as it is to say, or even to imagine such a thing, to be utterly crippled and destroyed. And likewise the air, with the exception of the small portion which is about the moon, was wholly obscured, being overcast by the violence and impetuosity of the water, which overran all the region belonging to it with irresistible might. Then were speedily destroyed all the crops and all the trees, for an unlimited quantity of water is as destructive to them as a scarcity. And innumerable flocks of animals, both tame and wild, perished at the same time. For it was natural, when the most excellent race of all, that of man, had been destroyed, that none of the inferior races should be left, since they were only created to be slaves to his necessities, and to be in a manner subject to his authoritative commands as their master. When such numbers then of such mighty evils had burst forth, which that time poured out, for all the portions of the world except the heaven itself were moved in an unnatural manner, as if they were stricken with a terrible and deadly disease, and one house alone, that of the aforesaid just and God-loving man, who had received the two highest of all gifts, was preserved. One gift being, as I've said already, the not being destroyed with all the rest of mankind, and the other that of becoming himself at a subsequent period, the founder of a new generation of mankind. For God thought him worthy to be both the end of our race and the beginning of it, the end of those men who lived before the deluge, and the beginning of those who lived after the deluge. Chapter 9. Such is he who was the most virtuous of all the men of his age, and such were the rewards which were allotted to him, which the Holy Scriptures enumerate, and the arrangement and classification of the aforesaid three. Whether you call them men or dispositions of the soul, it is very symmetrical, for the perfect man is entire from the beginning. But he who has his place changed is but half entire, having appropriated the earlier period of his life to wickedness and the subsequent time to virtue, to which he afterwards came over, and with which at that subsequent time he lived. But he who hopes, as his very name shows, has still a defect, for though he is always wishing for what is good, he is not as yet able to attain to it. But he is like those who are on a voyage, who, while they are eager to reach the harbor, are still kept at sea without being able to anchor in port. Chapter 10. I have now then explained the character of the first triad of those who desire virtue. There is also another more important company of which we must now proceed to speak. For the former resembles those branches of instruction which are allotted to the age of childhood, but this resembles rather the gymnastic exercises of athletic men, who are really preparing themselves for the sacred contests, who, despising all care of getting their body into proper condition, labor to bring about a healthy state of the soul, being desirous of that victory which is to be gained over the adverse passions. The particulars, then, on which each individual differs from the other, though all are hastening to one and the same end, we will hereafter examine more minutely. But it is necessary not to pass over in silence what it seems desirable to premise concerning the whole three taken together. It happens then that they are all three of one household and of one family. For the last of the three is the son of the middle one and the grandson of the first, and they are all lovers of God and beloved by God, loving the only God, and being loved in return by him who has chosen, as the Holy Scriptures tell us, by reason of the excess of their virtues in which they lived, to give them also a share of the same appellation as himself. For having added his own peculiar name to their names, he has united them together, appropriating to himself an appellation composed of three names. For, says God, quote, "This is my everlasting name. I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob," unquote. That's Exodus 3:15. Using there the relative term instead of the absolute one. And this is very natural, for God stands in no need of a name. But though he does not stand in any such need, nevertheless he bestows his own title on the human race, that they may have a refuge to which to betake themselves in supplications and prayers, and so may not be destitute of a good hope. Chapter 11. This, then, is what appears to be said of these holy men, and it is indicative of a nature more remote from our knowledge than, and more superior to, that which exists in the objects of outward sense. For the sacred word appears thoroughly to investigate and to describe the different dispositions of the soul, being all of them good, the one aiming at what is good by means of instruction, the second by nature, the last by practice. For the first, who is named Abraham, is a symbol of that virtue which is derived from instruction. The intermediate, Isaac, is an emblem of natural virtue. The third, Jacob, of that virtue which is devoted to and derived from practice. But we must not be ignorant that each of these men was endowed with all these powers, but that each derived his name from that one which predominated in him and mastered the others. For neither is it possible for instruction to be made perfect without natural endowments and practice, nor is nature able to arrive at the goal without instruction and practice, nor is practice unless it is founded on natural gifts and sound instruction. Very appropriately, therefore, he has represented as united by relationship these three, which in name indeed are men, but in reality, as I have said before, virtues, nature, instruction, and practice, which men also call by another name and entitle them the three graces, charities, either from the fact of God having bestowed on our race those three powers in order to produce the perfection of life, or because they themselves have bestowed themselves on the rational soul as the most glorious of gifts, so that the eternal name, as set forth in the Scriptures, may not be used in conjunction with three men, but rather with the aforesaid powers. For the nature of mankind is mortal, but that of virtues is immortal. And it is more reasonable that the name of the everlasting God should be conjoined with what is immortal than with what is mortal, since what is immortal is akin to what is imperishable, but death is hostile to it. Chapter 12. We must, however, not remain in ignorance that the sacred historian has presented the first man, him who was formed out of the earth as the father of all those who existed before the deluge, and him who, with his whole family, was the only person left out of so universal a destruction, because of his justice and his other excellencies and virtues, as the founder of a new race of men, which was to flourish hereafter. And that venerable and estimable and glorious triad is comprehended by the sacred Scriptures under one class, and called, quote, a royal priesthood and a holy nation, unquote. It's Exodus 19, verse 6. And its name shows its power, for the nation is further called, in the language of the Hebrews, Israel, which name, being interpreted, means seeing God. But of sight, that which is exercised by means of the eyes is the most excellent of all the outward senses, since by that alone all the most beautiful of existing things are comprehended, the sun and the moon and the whole heaven and the whole world. But the sight of the soul, which is exercised through the medium of its dominant part, excel all other powers of the soul, as much as the powers of the soul excel all other powers. And this is prudence, which is the sight of the mind, which is the sight of the mind. But he to whose lot it falls, not only by means of his knowledge, to comprehend all the other things which exist in nature, but also to behold the Father and Creator of the universe, has advanced to the very summit of happiness. For there is nothing above God, and if anyone, directing towards him the eye of the soul, has reached up to him, let him then pray for ability to remain and to stand firm before him. For the roads which lead upwards to him are laborious and slow, but the descent down the declivity, being rather like a rapid dragging down than a gradual descent, is swift and easy. And there are many things urged downwards, in which there is no use whatever, when God, having made the soul to depend on his own powers, drags it up towards himself with a more vigorous attraction. Chapter 13. Let thus much then, be said generally about the three persons, since it was absolutely necessary, but we must now proceed in regular order to speak of those qualities in which each separate individual surpasses the others, beginning with him who is first mentioned. Now he, being an admirer of piety, the highest and greatest of all virtues, labored earnestly to follow God, and to be obedient to the injunctions delivered by him, looking not only on those things as his commands, which were signified to him by words and facts, but those also which were indicated by more express signs through the medium of nature, and which the truest of the outward senses comprehends before the uncertain and untrustworthy hearing can do so. For if anyone observes the arrangement which exists in nature and the constitution according to which the world goes on, which is more excellent than any kind of reasoning, he learns, even though no one speaks to him, to study a course of life consistent with law and peace, looking to the example of good men. But the most manifest demonstrations of peace are those which the Scriptures contain, and we must mention the first, which also occurs the first in order in which they are set down. Now we're going to read one more chapter. Chapter 14. He, being impressed by an oracle, by which he was commanded to leave his country and his kindred and his father's house, and to emigrate like a man returning from a foreign land to his own country, and not like one who was about to set forth from his own land to settle in a foreign district, hastened eagerly on, thinking to do with promptness what he was commanded to do was equivalent to perfecting the matter. And yet, who else was it likely would be so undeviating and unchangeable as not to be won over by, and as not to yield to the charms of one's relations and one's country, for the love for which has in a manner, quote, grown with the growth and strengthened with the strength, unquote, of every individual, and even more, or at all events not less than the limbs united to the body have done. And we have witnesses of this in the lawgivers who have enacted the second punishment next to death, namely banishment, against those who are convicted of the most atrocious crimes, a punishment which indeed is not second to any, as it appears to me, if truth be the judge, but which is, in fact, much more grievous than death, since death is the end of all misfortunes, but banishment is not the end, but the beginning of new calamities. Inflicting instead of our death, accompanied by pain, 10,000 deaths with acute sensation, some men also, being engaged in traffic, do so of desire for gain, sail over the sea, or being employed in some embassy, or being led by a desire to see the sights of foreign countries, or by a love for instruction, having various motives which attract them outwards and prevent their remaining where they are, some being led by a love of gain, others by the idea of being able to benefit their native city as at its time of need in the most necessary and important particulars, others seeking to arrive at the knowledge of matters of which before they were ignorant, a knowledge which brings at the same time both delight and advantage to the soul. For men who have never traveled are to those who have, as blind men are to those who see clearly, are nevertheless anxious to behold their Father's threshold and to salute it, and to embrace their acquaintances, and to enjoy the most delightful and wished-for sight of their relations and friends, and very often seeing the affairs for the sake of which they left their country protracted, they have abandoned them, being influenced by that most powerful feeling of longing for union with their kindred. But this man, with a few companions, or perhaps I might say by himself, as soon as he was commanded to do so, left his home and set out on an expedition to a foreign country in his soul, even before he started with his body. His regard for mortal things being overpowered by his love for heavenly things. Therefore, giving no consideration to anything whatsoever, neither to men of his tribe, nor to those of his borough, nor to his fellow disciples, nor to his companions, nor to those of his blood as sprung from the same father or the same mother, nor to his country, nor to his ancient habits, nor to the customs in which he had been brought up, nor to his mode of life and his mates, every one of which things has a seductive and almost irresistible attraction and power. He departed as speedily as possible, yielding to a free and unrestrained impulse, and first of all he quitted the land of the Chaldeans, a prosperous district, and one which was greatly flourishing at that period, and went into the land of Haran. And from that, after no very distant interval, he departed to another place, which we will speak of hereafter, when we have first discussed the country of Haran. Interesting. Yeah, so that concludes our reading for tonight. Okay, so Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow to continue reading book 22 of Philo. Hey, perhaps after Philo, I'm thinking about this. Maybe I'll put up a poll sometime in the near future. After Philo, maybe we should get into Josephus. Josephus's name is usually named more than Philo, in many circles. So maybe we'll go into Josephus after this book and read about what he says about these kind of things. Amen. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you for your questions and your comments. One last time, if there is any prayer requests, feel free to drop them in the live chat. If not, that's fine. Thanks, everyone. Tower Time says, sounds good. Billy says, good night, blessings, and shalom, everyone. Good night. God bless you more. Shalom, Billy. All right. Tower Time says, thank you for sharing as always. Thank you, Tower Time. All right, we'll be back again, Lord willing, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. To continue, Tower Time says, y'all stay blessed. Thank you, Tower Time. You too. Okay. Tomorrow we'll begin reading chapter 15 of book 22 of Philo of Alexandria. Great Deception says, thank you, brother. Much love and blessings to you all. Thank you very much, Alan. Love and blessings multiplied back to you, brother. All right, that'll be it for tonight. We'll wrap it up. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Love you guys. As always, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen.